Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me on episode 33 of Friday Book Bites. And I am very excited today to be bringing to you a brand new author, Tania Farrelly. Hi Tania, thank you so much for joining me on Friday Book Bites. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Sandy. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited. It's my first one of these.
And it won't be your last. I can absolutely guarantee you about that. Before we get into today's chat, which I'm really looking forward to, I'm just going to pop up the details of the giveaway that we have going today. As my regular viewers will know, that I always do a giveaway with my Friday Book Bites. And we are going to be giving away, of course, one of Tania's beautiful new novels, The Eighth Wonder, for anybody who leaves a comment or asks a question either during the live stream today, or if you're watching this back a little bit later, up until midday on Saturday, the entries will still be open. And trust me when I tell you, this is a book you want to get your hands on. So let's get stuck into it, Tania. As I said, your novel, The Eighth Wonder, which is actually released today.
Today. Yeah, this is my launch event. Apart from the little live one I'm doing on Sunday, but this is my launch event, Sandy. So thank you for having me.
Oh, I am very excited. And when I find a book that I just love, I can't help but, like, I've actually got goosebumps on me right now. And I know the boys from Happy Valley who have joined us here today have read it, and it's one of their favourite books of the year. I don't tend to do, like a top 5 or a top 10 wrap up at the end of the year. But if I did, I can guarantee you that this would be on there. We've just got a couple of hellos before I ask you my first, deep and probing question. Chrissy has joined us. Yvonne has joined us, and Happy Valley are saying congratulations on the launch today. It is an amazing debut, and other people that have managed to read an advanced copy have also said to me that they can't believe it's a debut novel. It's just so gorgeous. And as I'm sure you read a lot as well, Tania, because that's just the nature of who we are and what we do, I often find that a story has either, a really cracking plot or is written in beautiful poetic prose. Yours is one of those rare gems that does both. So I just wanted to firstly congratulate you on that, because it's not common that we find those two things together. But what we're going to talk about firstly is the time traveling aspect of this. This is a historical fiction novel, and it takes place in the late 1800s in New York, and there's such a mix of amazing historical features in this, from the beginnings of the suffragette movement, the birth of steel architecture and skyscrapers, which were a new thing at that time, right down to elephants playing on the beach at Coney Island. It's such a magical mix of all of this, and I felt that I was there in
so good. Thank you.
In that place and in that time. And I wanted to ask you firstly, Tania, how did you bring that to life on the page for us?
I suppose, well, just a little bit about my background. I come out of an advertising background, and my role for many years was as a researcher. So it comes quite naturally to me to sort of delve into things with as much depth as possible. And so I think one of the things that was really important to me is just to get to the nitty-gritty of the era and really feel it. And one of the ways that I sort of went about doing that first, and I think speaks volumes for any era, is looking at the newspapers of the day. So their language, looking at what the cultural conflict was, because I also think having a cultural conflict as a background is really meaty. You can get your teeth into all of that, and you can start to feel the tension yourself, what it might be like to be a woman in a patriarchal society, having to wear corsets, not being able to lunch, of your own free will, having ambitions, and just things like, I'm doing show and tell because I love that bit. But this is an article from the New York Times, which is about a circus on parade. And you get so much from the language of the times. They're talking about wonder features heavily, actually, outpouring of the wonders of Four Paws and Cell's circus, the amazing aggregation of wonders. They had a lot of alliteration and So delving into that and then looking at documentaries and obviously reading heaps of textbooks and that sort of stuff, I think then it starts to come out of you because you start thinking like that. You know, you start thinking in that way even when you're going for a walk, you can start to think, what will my character think? Because you're so deep down in it. I think that helps.
Yeah, you mentioned the corsets just then. Oh gosh, those scenes made me cringe when Rose was being tied into her corsets and trying to get the 18-inch waist, and she couldn't breathe. And I'm so glad we've come so far. Although they're coming back, I saw on some Facebook posts that corsets were coming back, and I was like, God, no, please.
I know. You know, I think they've got other things now, like the shape undies. They're better ones. You know, those
just let it all hang out, I say, but that's just me. The boys from Happy Valley have said that you totally nailed the era, and I felt that as well. And I just wanted to let you know that we've got Joe tuning in from South Australia, who's very excited for this one.
Hi,
and Janet tuning in from my hometown, Coffs Harbour. Now, what was it about this particular part of history that captured your imagination and made you want to write about it?
Well, it really started off with I saw some footage of an elephant in Coney Island being wired up to be electrocuted. She was being executed. Yeah, I know. It was, and the footage is very old. It's 1903, and it was some of Edison's earliest work using what they called moving pictures back then. He invented that, and so he was taking this with this, I guess, cinematography of the elephant, like it was just an everyday thing that you would kill an elephant at Coney Island because she was past her use-by date. Anyway, it really struck at my heart. I couldn't get it out of my head, and I started to look at what happened, why this was happening to her, and I wished that someone was brave enough to step in on her behalf. And indeed, you've read the story, and so I started to research the era and who might actually love the elephant enough to step in, and just took me down a rabbit hole of this amazing place, which was 30 years after the Civil War, but cultural conflict everywhere. So you had the really rich people up at the top end of Fifth Avenue, down the nerve centre, and then the poor immigrants in the Lower East Side, and never the twain shall meet. And it was also, at that time, New York was the crucible of world progress. So as you said, Sandy, quite rightly, that there was the invention of steel, the first skyscrapers were being built. I mean, Flatiron building had not been built yet, but there was a whole new school of architecture. There was the birth of the suffrage movement through the settlement houses and the union movements. So there was just a whole lot of really interesting detail that really captured my imagination. Even the birth of electricity, the whole fight between Edison and Tesla. Westinghouse was on Tesla's side and JP Morgan was on Edison's, and they were battling it out, and in the end Tesla won. I mean, we use to this day his alternating current. And Edison tried really hard to discredit him. And the documentary that I saw actually was erroneous, because it said the execution of the elephant was all part of this war of the currents, but it actually wasn't. It was post that. That's what got me into it. Anyway, that's a very long-winded answer to your
it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. And there's a few people here that are loving the research side of it as much as I am. Fiona McKenzie saying that she could lose herself in research, and it's lovely to see what was compared to what we have now. Joe mentioned that the research would have been equally sad and fascinating. And Craig and Phil have said that reading about Daisy brought up so much emotion. For people who haven't read the book yet, which will be most of you because it's only just hitting the shelves today, Daisy is an elephant in the story, and it is quite heartbreaking. While we're talking about the research, there is so much in this book from the way you deal with the architecture and the descriptions that you use and the battle for Rose. Rose is our protagonist who's there on the cover, who's trying to be an architect at a time when women were not allowed to be architects. We've got the animal welfare aspect, obviously the description of New York in that time. There's so much in there, the birth of the unions. But as a reader, we're not overwhelmed by the research. And I have read a lot of historical fiction where I can see that the author has just thrown all the research on the page because they want to show you how much that they've done. And this is not the case with your book. It's all there, but it's just so beautifully part of the story. And I wanted to ask you how you managed to find that balance, because not everybody can do that as beautifully as you have.
Well, thank you. That means so much to me. I think partly it was just making sure that I was always looking through Rose's reality. So I was interested in seeing the world through her eyes and how she was going to get to what she wanted. And so, I mean, look, I did that much research, this much of the book, you know. And that allows you then to absorb what the culture was like and actually to see the world through their eyes. So you're not going to necessarily sprout it out as lots of facts. However, having said that, I did learn a lot through the editing process. So it pays to have a hard-nosed editor who will say, no, this just looks like you're showing off, you know. So how much you know. And I think, you know, I had really good guidance. I can't take credit for all of it. I think I learned a lot through the process. So, yeah, very lucky to have someone to pull me up and going, well, no, you know, you don't need to talk about that. It's not relevant. Or it just looks like you're trying to chuck facts in.
Do you have a background in architecture at all, or any of the areas that you've described in the book?
No, I don't have a background in architecture. Obviously I'm interested in animal rights, and I've always been interested in the women's movement, and it was historical fiction that kind of got me into wanting to work in advertising and work in marketing when it wasn't really a thing back in the 80s. But the architecture side of things I thought was kind of fascinating, as I say in the book, a bit of a bookmark in time, to see that New Yorkers were absolutely enamoured with being European or feigning Europeanness, because they'd go off every summer to Europe and to France and, you know, sip their lovely gins and look at the Beaux-Arts architecture. And so it was showing the architecture was fascinating from that perspective. And then when I was in New York, and I had a great tour guide who took me around, and she mentioned that I could learn more about the actual architecture from the New York Landmarks Trust. And so online, I can Google in the Designated Landmarks Trust and bring up all another exhibit in here. You know, here's for anyone that is writing historical, you know, this is about Murray Hill where Rose lived, and it plots out the streets and it plots out the buildings and it says who's built them. So you can actually get your teeth right into the detail.
You did that well, and Craig and Phil agree with me, which is nice. It's always nice when Craig and Phil and I are on the same page, that they agree with my statement that the research on the page is subtle and beautifully balanced. Carrie has mentioned that it relates to getting into that deep point of view, and you've definitely done that. We are totally in Rose's world throughout this story. And Chrissy has commented that you have a beautiful knack with prose and description. Absolutely. That the historical component is unassuming. That's the perfect word, Chrissy. Thank you. That was the word I was looking for. And just the right balance to show Rose's world. Yvonne has an interest in building and construction, having worked at the Master Builders Association, and hearing of Florence Mary Taylor, who would have been a pioneer in her days. And we do love hearing about pioneer women in our fiction, don't we?
Absolutely. And actually there was a woman in Chicago who was around about Rose's time, who ended up marrying Walter Burley Griffin. and coming to Australia to design Canberra. So
Ah.
yeah, I think she worked, she might have even worked for Frank Lloyd Wright for some time. But yeah, there's a nice little connection there as well with the times.
There is. Fiona McKenzie has said that it must be difficult to balance the facts with today's issues and language. And I think you've done that beautifully in the story. While I definitely felt I was in another era, I didn't feel like it was completely foreign to me. I felt like we belonged there.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, it is tricky. And I think that's comes back to my point of reading the newspapers of the times, because you know, the language is extravagant back then, and I think it was just about making sure that we were able to portray some of that through the prose in the book without losing the meaning, because essentially, you know, a lot of these issues still exist today, and they're still people. They were still people the same as us with the same issues, the same humour, and that sort of thing. And I think just remembering that, yeah, okay, the languages and culture was a bit different, but still being able to, I guess, dial into the prose and the dialogue the necessary little cues, you know, like they use the word manifestly a lot, and you'll see that in the prose, and things like, you know, words like extravagant and all sorts of things to describe
redoubtable, the redoubtable Rose.
Redoubtable, all those sorts of things, you know, dauntless and all that sort of stuff. And they're, you know, the language is absolutely beautiful. I love it. It's one of my favourite eras of language. So, you know, even just reading books written in that time too was quite inspiring to me.
Now, I've got a couple more questions on the research I wanted to ask you, but before I do, we've got a comment here from someone I'm assuming is probably your mama, Beverly Smith, who is so proud of our daughter and her book. And Beverly, you have absolutely every right to be proud. This is a stunning, stunning novel. Now, back on the research, I wanted to ask you how much of what was going on in and around Rose's story was based on perhaps real people and real events. Obviously, you do mention people like Tesla and all those guys. They're not actually part of the story as such. But within Rose's world, how much were you drawing on real events or real people?
Yeah, there's quite a bit on real events. So Rose herself is a fictional character, but I based some of her story on the life of Julia Morgan, who was a San Franciscan architect and was indeed the first woman to get into the school of, well, it's called L'École des Beaux-Arts, but my French accent's dreadful. But she was the first woman to get in there, and she had to try 3 times to get in. She didn't actually fail at any time. The first time she just didn't get into the cutoff, so they only accepted the top 30. She was 42, so she didn't get in. The second time, she got into the top 30, scraped into the top 30, but the men decided they didn't want to encourage women, so they didn't let her in. And then the third time she placed 13th, and so they had to let her in. So that side of Rose is heavily leaning on Julia's legacy. And then Florence Kelly and Lillian Wald are both real people, both existed in the settlement houses at that time. So they were there at that time, and they were the women who started the union movements, and also were very heavily in the next century, in the 1910s and between 1910 and 1920, also heavily involved in the suffrage movement. And so I wanted to put them in because, and I ummed and ahed about it, but I felt it would be a great homage to them to have them mentioned now in this day and age, and have people realise just how much they did do for all women, even us in Australia. So, yeah.
There's a trend at the moment I've noticed, particularly with historical fiction, from female writers really exploring these forgotten figures in history of pioneering women who made a huge difference. And I personally think that's just brilliant.
Yeah, well, there's so many stories, and there's just almost too many to even cover. But I think and it's not to say they didn't have men helping them. Lillian Wald in the Henry Street settlement had a great benefactor, a very rich benefactor, who helped her buy the Henry Street settlement house, which still exists today. It is a museum and it's lovely. And if you get to New York anytime in the next decade, go, because it's just really it's a beautiful, heartwarming story. She put the first playgrounds in the streets for the children of the slums, and taught them skills and all the stuff that you'll see in the book anyway. But yeah, there's heaps of inspiring stories, and it's lovely to be able to be part of telling them.
Your auntie is also joining us today. Hi, Auntie Ant. Lovely to see you here. And I'm going to come back to one of the earlier comments, because there's a specific example from the book that I wanted to bring up. And it was this one here from Fiona, where she talked about the research and what was compared to what it is now. And one of the reasons I love reading historical fiction so much is drawing those parallels between the historical period and the now, and exploring what has and what hasn't changed quite so much. And there's a really specific example in the book, and this is so the union movement that is explored in the book is from the female seamstresses working in the clothing factories and the poor conditions that they were working under. And one of the leaders of the suffrage movement decided to put a white label on the clothes to indicate an ethical manufacturer. And I was like, that's just like today, where we have symbols on our goods to indicate an ethical manufacturer. And it really struck me as we really haven't come that far at all, have we? That we need to have these things that businesses and big conglomerates need to be forced to do the right thing.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think in some ways we haven't come a long way, but in some ways we have, because there's been a whole generational cycle gone on from there. So, industrialization gave birth to these moguls, men with lots of power who jammed all the women into factories, and that's where the term sweatshops came from, and children. So, and then, you had people like Florence and her people standing up and enforcing the 40-hour work week. So we've got to remember that these people were actually working 7 days a week. The lucky ones were working 6, but they were also working 12 hours a day and going home to little chicken coops. So, that sort of stuff has changed by degrees. And then with mass media coming in, TV, radio, the whole capitalism movement, and mass manufacturing and plastics, et cetera, just born its own problems. We've endured another cycle of that. So we saw the cycles coming again, I think, coming around the circle. So, but, then I think about the women and the fact that they couldn't even go to lunch without a man accompanying them. As soon as they got married, they had to give up their jobs and also their finances. So they actually had fewer rights than a family dog. So I think in that respect, we have come a long way, and we can keep, pushing that further, obviously.
It reminds me of that old adage, the more things change, the more they stay the same. That we just go in cycles, don't we? It's a different issue, but it's the same issue.
Yeah. And even animal rights, there's still, that's not much is really changing there, and that's taking forever. And that's, what sparked the book originally. And then I became aware of what's going on today with the elephants in Asia, and even with COVID, a lot of them are starving because they're shackled and their owners can't feed enough. So, those sorts of things are still fairly rampant.
Craig and Phil have asked, when you were doing your research, did you find other stories that are jumping out to be written? And that's that rabbit hole we often talk about as authors, that we head down this and we never know where it's going to lead us.
Yeah, look, at first I did. And one of my, as you can tell by my waffling, I can go in different tangents quite easily, and I had to keep myself fairly disciplined on this story. And I always loved things to do with animals and even circuses, not so much obviously now that I know what went on in terms of the brutality towards animals, but I could have quite easily slipped down into that area more than I have. I really wanted this to be a story about a woman finding her independence through taking action, and so that's why I've tried to stick to that.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Rose a little bit. That's a beautiful segue, actually. She is the heroine of this story, and she's a really wonderful character. And I know that she is so far this year my favourite heroine of all the books I've read in 2021. She shows the most amazing amount of strength and compassion and intelligence and humour. And one of the things I don't like in novels is when a strong female character has to be mean and nasty and the queen B word. Yeah. Rose is the complete opposite of that. She's just the most gorgeous soul, but the strength within her is amazing. You mentioned that she was based, that her architectural side of things was based on a real character, but where did the heart of Rose come from? Because she's just amazing.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it's one of those things that you observe in the people that you like around you. I think I've just observed good people and watched, people that are really selfless and, even everyday people like teachers and nurses I admire so much because they give so much of themselves and yet seek so little. And I think I was channeling a bit of that. I mean, I do come from a good stock family of teachers, so I can relate. And my sister was a nurse, so I just, I think I wanted to give her those characteristics and to show that really women don't. I mean, this is my personal point of view, but I don't think women need to stand on soapboxes and be aggressive to get something done. I think, we're more than capable of having good, logical conversations and being strategic in how we act. And she was very strategic in how she went about doing things. And that actually can often get you a lot further and help lead others in the right direction. And also with other women, and that's, I've even experienced that with writing a book. Everyone's been so supportive and feel like I would never be here without that. So, it was more trying to harness that sensibility about her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I want to be Rose when I grow up.
Me too.
Jen McCusker, who is a fellow writer, has said it's a privilege to be in a position to lend our voices to women who had their voices diminished. And Jo and I are on the same page on this one, that she would love to see more historical fiction in high schools as an alternative to textbooks. It would be so much more engaging and relatable. I am a huge fan of this concept, and I've said this to quite a few of the historical authors that I know, that we should be teaching history through fiction, because it's just it's a much more accessible and it's a more personal way to connect with the past, rather than reading just a list of facts and figures and dates. And it's just the humanity in historical fiction is just gorgeous.
And I think I think all authors and readers would know this. It's about engaging the emotion. Once you've got someone here, they'll naturally go there. And I've learned, I didn't study history at school at all, and I wasn't particularly interested in it either, except in fiction books. So I devoured fiction books on World War II. I just couldn't get enough, and also on American Indians. I was wanted to be one, and so that's how I got my fix of history and what I how I like to learn. So I totally agree. I think it's a great idea. Historical fiction would be awesome. Yeah.
It is, and Jem is on our bandwagon as well, that she advocates for this. She's learned more through historical fiction than she has from any textbook. Carrie has mentioned that she feels like Rose would be a wonderful role model. Oh, she absolutely is, Carrie. Carrie, you will love Rose. Now, obviously, Tania, you have a wonderfully supportive family. We've had a couple of them pop up already today. Now, your mum's also jumped in to say that she's received a text from your sister who's living in the States, who is also watching. Hello from the States, Tania's sister, and that she was a great help to your research. What role did your family play in helping this book baby be born?
Yeah, so lots of different roles. Obviously, Mum read a very early version. I did have to apologise to her because to start with,
she loved it and loved you anyway.
She did, but when I did Fiona McIntosh's masterclass, she said, "Now don't show it to your parents because they're going to say it's fabulous." So I did, and then so that feedback was really helpful, and then. My sister obviously is an American citizen and she lives in New York. And so she read an early version, but also gave it to a couple of her New York native friends to read, just to make sure I wasn't, I could actually claim some kind of credibility. And then obviously I went over there and we traipsed around the streets of New York and got lost and whatnot. So, yeah, it was all encompassing and, people have been incredibly generous with their time. Yeah, my family included.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm glad you got a chance to go over there before the world shut borders.
Yeah, I know.
It's a tough one. Now, those viewers who know me and have been following me for a while now know that I am a lover of historical fiction. Women's fiction, which is what I write, and historical fiction are the two genres that I read the most of. And the Eighth Wonder has everything in it that I love in historical fiction. It has obviously the history, and a beautiful history at that. There is intrigue, there's action, there's romance, there's a mystery. How did you balance all of those elements in such a harmonious way? Because at no one point was I like, oh, get rid of the romance, I want more history, or get rid of the history, I want more romance. Like it just moves so beautifully through all of those elements. How did you do that so beautifully?
I wish I knew, honestly. I think, I don't know. I hope I can do it again. But I think it was more trying to, I guess, trust my reader's eye. Like when you write, you get so deep down into it, and knowing what to cut and what to add. I think once I've written a chapter, I would then go back and go, so what? What's this adding? What is this delivering? Do I want to read on? And just trusting my reader's eye to go, that sounds awful, or that needs to be, I don't feel any sense of tension. There's no hook for me to read on. I think it was just doing that and just trying to keep going over and over and over, make sure, like I'd written one of my very early versions, I had written up to the Bradley Martin ball but not shown it. And so someone said to me, I feel really ripped off. I didn't see the ball. And so that was good feedback to know just how much to put in versus, is not.
It's an interesting a point that you just raised then about the tension, and it was there tension in the scenes as you were reading them back. It isn't a suspense novel, but I found myself in quite a little bit of suspense all the way through. Even with tiny things like, when we first meet Chet, and I'm not going to give away any spoilers, when we first meet Chet, who is a possible love interest in the story. And I'm like, yeah, he's a really nice guy. Oh, yeah, I'm sure he's a nice guy. And you had me like on the edge of my seat going, how's this going to go? I don't know what Tania's going to do here. So even with those subtle things, you know, as opposed to the big plot points, you know, I was constantly, like, every chapter, you know, I can't tell you how many times I was up, you know, 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, yeah, just one more chapter. It is that kind of book that is just one more chapter. I need to know what happens next.
Oh, that's lovely. Oh, thanks for that. But I think we've all known a Chet, haven't we, in our lifetime?
Yeah, you kind of sucked me in there at the beginning, and I thought I was going to be Team Chet for a little while, but yeah, you hoodwinked me there, I think, Tanya. But luckily, early enough on, you know, I discovered the truth there. Yvonne has left a comment that that I've completely sold. I've done my job. Excellent. Looking forward to reading it. You won't be disappointed, Yvonne. And Yvonne's been a viewer of mine for a while now, and I'm fairly confident in saying that you will absolutely enjoy it. And Chrissy agrees that it is a page turner. She flew through the pages with glee, and Fiona has moved it to the top of her books to get, which is fantastic. And again, you won't be disappointed that you do that. Now, as we've mentioned, today is release day for this beautiful book. Now, those of us in Sydney, we can't go to the bookshops at the moment because we are in lockdown. However, you can order online from all of your usual places, or if you have a fantastic local bookstore, if you give them a call, I'm sure they will deliver. Most of them do. But I cannot stress to you enough how important it is to go out and get this book. You know, it's a beautiful, beautiful read. What I wanted to ask you, Tania, also was, you know, as this is your debut and as it is release day today, what's been the biggest surprise for you on this writing journey to get to today?
I think it's as simple as the supportive nature of the writing community is that's been so wonderful. And you know, I've come from 30 years in advertising, and it's not to say that there isn't great people in advertising, because there is. That's why I stayed for so long. But the actual community, the bigger community, is very competitive. And I know where all authors are in competition, and when you look at how many, you know, even new releases there are every month, you go, you know, golly, how am I ever going to cut through any of this? And they're great books. But everyone seems so supportive and generous with their time, and you're a good example of that. You know, inviting me on when it's my first novel and I'm a no one. So that's been my greatest. You know, it's just a lovely thing to hug to your heart, really.
Yeah, well, firstly, you're not a no one, and you certainly won't be once people get this book in their hands. But it is, you are right. It is the writing community and the reading community are such a wonderful, supportive bunch of people, and I think part of that is because we were all there at one point. You know, it's not that long ago that my debut novel came out. You know, obviously I'm up to number 4 this year, but you know, we all started in that same place, and I don't see it as competition. That's the thing, because, and I'm sure the readers that are watching this will agree, readers who love to read will read. You know, they're not going to not buy my book because they've bought your book. You know, they're going to buy both or read both or borrow from the library, or however it is that they devour their books. And it's just, it is a really, really beautiful community, and I'm so blessed and proud to be a part of it. I'm just going to, we're going to wrap this up. So if anyone has any last minute questions for Tania, pop them in now. I'm going to put up the details of where you can find Tania online and go through some of the comments that are coming through as well. So this is where you can find Tania online. Janet, who has tuned in a lot to Friday Book Bites, said this is one of the best book bites she's seen, and we have whetted her appetite totally. Carrie is in the middle of study commitments, but when she finishes, she's heading out to get this. Jem is also going to head out to get her copy this weekend. Excellent, Jem. Anne, who I've known for quite some time, is enjoying this very much, and another book to add to her to-be read pile, and is a huge reader. So that will be great. Oh no, Fiona's pulled me up on the word lockdown. The word lockdown is shuddering. Right, yes. So this is my third lockdown, because I was caught up over Christmas in the Northern Beaches lockdown as well. So fun times. And I don't know about everybody stocking toilet paper. I'm stocking up on chocolate. That's how I'm coping with lockdown. And Phil and Craig, who are huge supporters of the writing community here in Australia, and in particular female writers. They are the most blessed souls in the world. They will be screaming from the rooftops about The Eighth Wonder, recommending it. Darlene has popped in, and she's glad she has caught this live. And Denise is also looking forward to reading this, and thank you for the opportunity to hear more about it. Mary Lou Stevens, who is another writer and who will be appearing on Book Bites in another month or so, I think it is looking forward to the audio of this. Oh, and Lucky Kay, her copy arrived today. Excellent. So Kay, I would advise making a coffee or a tea or a glass of wine or whatever it is that is your favour, and blocking everything else out for the rest of the day. And Yvonne is saying it was lovely to meet you, Tania, and it's the best way to meet and get to know your authors. I'm so glad that we are in a position to be able to do that, and it's one of the reasons why I do Friday Book Bites. So thank you so much for joining me today, Tania. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm going to hold it up one more time because I can't get enough of it. I'm covering your name there, by Tania Farrelly. It really is. Congratulations. It's a beautiful novel, and I'm so thrilled that you agreed to join me today on your release day. 2 last questions before I let you go. What have you got planned for the rest of the day to celebrate, and what's up for you next?
Okay, so the rest of the day, my daughters have just arrived from Melbourne, so they are going to come up to Book Grove in Ocean Grove with me, and to Torquay and to Geelong to sign some books, which is the first time ever. So today is first. It's very exciting, and so we'll be going like a little travelling troupe, the whole family, including my husband, and off we go. And I'll probably ply social media with some more of my posts. And I am going to have a lovely glass of the Elephant in the Room wine that the winery sent to me. Nice. And then what's next? I'm working on another story for Penguin at the moment, and it is another, obviously, historical, and it's set at the end of, well, around about 1917, 1918. So just busy trying to wrangle that one into order. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Well, once everybody has read The Eighth Wonder, I am sure they will be begging you for your next one. So I'm glad to hear that you are working on another one.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Tania. And as I said, even if you are watching this back later after the live stream has ended, you will still be eligible to go in the draw. So do pop in questions. Tania and I can pop back in to the Facebook comments over the next 24 hours if anyone has any questions there that we can answer for you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I can't wait to meet you in person. We've not actually met in person yet, Tania, so hopefully that's not too far down the track. But the Happy Valley Boys are going to be meeting you on the 13th at one of your events. So if you want...
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Sorry, you're welcome. I was just going to say, if you want to know where Tania is going to be, because you are still having events in Victoria, pop onto Tania's website and find her on social media, and you can find out where her events will be.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks, Sandy. Thank you, everybody, for joining me on my debut. Awesome.
Thanks.
See ya.